Good afternoon. I want to welcome everyone to hearing number 11 of the 189th period of sessions. And the title of this hearing is Human Rights of Persons Deprived of Liberty in Dominican Republic. This hearing will take 1 hour and 30 minutes, and we are going to distribute the time in the following way. 20 minutes for civil society, 20 minutes for the state, 20 minutes for the commission for its comments. We may not take all 20 minutes, but there it is. And then we have additional 12 minutes for civil society and for the states. And then we have the closure. So I want to also recognize Madam Ambassador and the representatives of the state and the representatives of civil society. And I'm sure you all will join me in commemorating that this is our 65th year of existence. We're in the 65th year of the life of the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights, and we're commemorating it for the entire year. It's been 65 years of defending and promoting human rights, standing up for the American Convention on Human Rights and the Democratic Charter. And we have quite a history of achievement, and if you all will allow me to give some statistics on that achievement as we celebrate. Since 1959, we have had over 100 on-site visits. I feel sure it must be more than 100, Maria Claudia. We've granted over 1,000 precautionary measures. We have prepared more than 750 merit reports, 220 friendly settlements, and we have referred 377 cases to the Inter-American Court on Human Rights. All of this work we do with the victims as the central focus of our work and our priority, but we also prioritize, of course, as we must, state accountability and supporting states through our technical advisory services to meet their regional and international human rights obligations. So I hope you join me in commemorating the 65th year of the Commission. I just want to say a little something about accessibility, and we are also with the audience online and participants online. So to ensure that our hearing is inclusive, or as inclusive as we can make it, we ask that all participants, before you start your presentation, please state your name, your position, and your organization. And indeed, anytime you take the floor, and including us, commissioners, because I think we're not doing it, please repeat your name so that those who are online know who's talking. And particularly the visually impaired can identify the speakers. For those who are online with us, we want to remind you that Zoom subtitles are available to you. You just have to turn it on your computer, and also choose the display size. You may want bigger, larger, or smaller font. And I also want to alert anyone who's watching us virtually that you can access this hearing not only through the Zoom, but also through the Facebook, the Commission's Facebook page, and also it's being live streamed on YouTube. So various ways to follow us. So with that, I want to turn it over to civil society and tell you that you have 20 minutes to make a presentation. The clock is on the screen, as you can see, and we ask you to please pay attention to the clock and to self-monitor. I would not want to have to interrupt you in the middle of your sentence. So over to you. Thank you very much and welcome.
Muchas gracias, honorable.
Thank you very much, Honorable President and distinguished commissioners in representation of, and the state representation. My name is Juan Miguel Rondon, and together with my colleagues Fernando Antonio de Jesus and Belkis Valdez and Dr. Manuel Maria Mercedes, President of the institution, we address you on behalf of the National Commission of Human Rights of the Dominican Republic. We want to thank the fact that they've given us this visit on human rights of the persons deprived of their freedom, which is to give vital information regarding the inhuman situation in which those deprived of freedom in our country live. In the Dominican Republic, since Trujillo's dictatorship to date, there's been the constant violation of human rights in the penitentiary centers, with recurrent complaints of corruption, torture, of crowding, extreme cautionary measures which become anticipated sentences, lack of access to health and education. The penitentiary system in the country has two management systems within it, that though one expected that with the implementation of a law 113-21, which creates the penitentiary precautionary system in the country, a single model would be implemented, but the opposite has happened. To date, the transformation model, implementation of models, is stagnated. Currently, there are 7 centers completed about 80%, which are Salcedo, Elías Piña, Barahona, the extension of the Fe y Hombres, San Pedro de Macorís, and Las Pajas. But they have not been completed. Currently, there are 46 centers depriving people of their liberty in the 32 provinces of the country, with capacity for 12,000 prisoners, while at present there are 26,000 people deprived of their freedom, and 80% of them are preventive, and about 1,825 are foreigners, mostly Haitians. Of the 26,000 inmates, about 10,000 are in the new model. The remaining 16,000 are in the traditional system. In the centers, CPL, the rights of people are violated due to lack of space, poor food, very little health care, no medicines, almost non-existent access to drinking water, lack of hygiene, and crowding, which places the lives and the dignity of these people at risk. At present, the national penitentiary system is totally collapsed, since the government has shown lack of political interest in doing the expected penitentiary reforms. The reclusion conditions lead to damages that become a violation, which is unacceptable, of the human rights of the people deprived of their freedom. The traditional model is conceived as a market where everything is sold. Rum, drugs, weapons, whatever. Everything is sold and everything is bought, even the human life. One could say, without fear of exaggerating, that it's like a cemetery of live people. And now I'll give the floor to my colleague, Fernando Antonio de la Cruz. I'm sorry, but we cannot hear.
Señor Fernando, tiene el micrófono apagado, si puede encenderlo.
¿Me escucha?
Can you hear me? Yes, now we hear you. Thank you. Fernando Antonio Abreu de Jesús, de este lado. Crowding, as the defender of public ministry says that the victory, I'm sorry, but the interpreter cannot interpret. There's a lot of interruption. There's a lot of crowding of about 200-300%. It's not exclusive of this center. This is something can be found everywhere in all the traditional systems. This is the center that could be considered the largest of the Dominican Republic, with an estimated population of about 7,608 inmates, when the capacity of the center is of 2,000. And it has, furthermore, 3,925 inmates who are in a preventive state, 3,683 sentenced. This promotes reinsertion of those deprived of their freedom. The state has not implemented any type of segregation between those preventive and sentenced. There's a lot of interruption. We're just picking up sentences here and there. I'm sorry. In Quince Aspa, which is one of the largest penitentiary centers, there's a capacity of only about 102 inmates, but the actual penitentiary population is 410, of which 283 are preventive, and 127 sentenced. San Juan, despite having a capacity of 400 inmates, has 700, of which 452 are preventive and 248 sentenced. In Sable, despite their capacity being 248, currently has 4 times that capacity. 4 times that capacity. There are those who sleep in the hallways of what are called ranas, because they do not have money to pay for the space. They are placed in these positions. Of these, 721 are preventive, 220 are sentenced. In Cotuí, each one of the provinces I am mentioning, or each one of these centers I'm mentioning, are where you can find the penitentiary centers in the country. Cotuí belongs to the traditional center, built for a capacity of 262 people. However, it currently has 769 prisoners, of which 545 are preventive prisoners and 224 are convicted. Barahona has a center located, overcrowded, exceeding its capacity. 214 prisoners with actual 660 in the center. 431 of these are preventive, 229 are sentenced or convicted. We need beds, mattresses, space, medications, care, real care. Several people are sleeping in the hallways as well because they have to negotiate the spaces there. In Bami, the center in Bami was conceived originally several decades ago as a preventive jail with a capacity for 150 inmates. But today, there are more than 1,300 inmates in overcrowded conditions. We were able to show that there are inmates there that have been there 8 months in a punishment cell. We have to find a solution for that because they are living in a deplorable condition, living in the hallways. When you come to these centers to see these people sleeping as though they were in shoe boxes, where there's not even space to sit, and they have to spend the whole day in the patio until it's time to sleep. As for the health situation, I'm sorry, there's a lot of interruption of the sound, so I'm just trying to give you as much as I can get. Juan Miguel Rondon again. Good afternoon from the Dominican Republic. The health situation in the prisons is serious. I'm sorry, there's there's interruption. We cannot hear the speaker. She's asking if we can hear her, but that's all we've heard. The fact that she's asking if we can hear her. The health situation. The health situation in prisons is serious. If you could turn on your camera, please, because we cannot see you. There you are. Can you see me now? The health situation in the prisons is serious. According to recent studies of the Ombudsman, 34% of the prison population is sick. 20% of them are suffering from some type of mental disorder. The unhealthy conditions are incompatible with the maximum rules of penitentiary treatment. Lack of adequate psychological care or even lack of psychiatric care is present. This report, in fact, indicates that around 450 inmates suffer from tuberculosis, and the sexual practices are done without protection, in other words, without a condom, and this is common amongst the inmates. Despite the fact that more than 200 of these people live with HIV in this center, they don't receive any medications or the antiretrovirals. There's no free medication programs. And the women deprived of freedom are distributed in 10 facilities. 70% of them are in Najayo and Santiago, but there are mixed centers like Magua, Samaná, Salcedo, and Montecristo, where men and women deprived of their freedom cohabit. And they're only divided by a single door on either pavilion or side. Though the women are a minority, the conditions under which they live are similar to those of men, where the allocation prevails, but to a smaller degree. There are inadequate infrastructures, lack of beds, very little medical or gynecological care, and lack of water. Furthermore, in the penitentiary system, women are not provided with menstrual hygiene supplies. Other situations that should be highlighted is that conjugal visits in some of the centers, women are either prohibited or limited for women, which causes many marriage breakdowns. In your hands, you have some images where you show the inadequate way in which each one of these women or men deprived of their freedom are treated. In the first picture you see, we have a little room, just to explain it somehow, where they bathe, they clean themselves, more than 30 people. And further down, we can see a toilet used by the same 30 people. On that other page, we have where the inmates live, those deprived of their freedom, where we have bunk beds which have 3 levels. So the way in which they sleep are also pretty precarious. This is the washing area, the kitchen. And in the last pictures, you can see the recreation area, where they presumably have some type of recreation. But the same area where they bathe, and it's the same area where they bathe their clothing. This is as far as I go. Juan Miguel? 40% of the 26,000 people deprived of their freedom in the country are prisoners for minor crimes. And this is depending on provisional measures imposed on them. These centers or facilities do not follow even the minimum rules of the United Nations on the prisons measures or the rules of Kyoto, despite the fact that there is Decree 456/20 from the President of the Republic ordering the end of the penitentiary reform. It has remained dead. The law 113/21 continues to be applied. Not even its regulation has not even become a law yet. The current authorities have not built one single cell more to cover the deficit of the 16,000 spaces needed to cover the tremendous overcrowding in the country. We've detected also that more than 405 inmates throughout the country have orders for freedom, and yet they're still behind bars simply for bureaucratic reasons. And there are 2,000 of these who are there for fines or economic warranties that go from 3,000 to 20,000 pesos, which is around $30. The deplorable conditions of detention are a true risk for the life and integrity of persons, and as such are cruel and inhuman and even degrading treatment. And lastly, through reiterated and constant testimonies, we received information of mistreatment, torture, in these centers in the country by the authorities. There are many situations in which the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights has established condemns against any type of torture or abuse of these persons, especially because these people are in a position where they cannot defend themselves vis-a-vis the state agents. And now we go to the president with the petitions. And finally, honorable commissioners, we would like to mention what we have been proposing to the Dominican state. But as we say in the Dominican Republic, there's an important delegation of the state here who's really hearing us, because we haven't managed to get them to hear us, and hopefully maybe we'll come with something positive out of this. In these terms of reference, the first thing we want to bring up is that it is urgent that an important delegation visit the Dominican Republic in one of these in loco visits so that they can see for themselves what we're saying here. And that is not just what we've said or what the state can respond to. Secondly, we're also proposing that the state, the Dominican state, have that they forgive them. But in the Dominican Republic, we know that this has been forgiven in the Dominican Republic. And we know that as the Constitution states in international pacts and states, they can condone or pardon those who may be sick or may have terminal diseases. And we have an important population of people over the age of 60 where, despite the Constitution has a mechanism to release them, it's impossible that they cannot use the pardon or the pardon to let them go. They're speaking of the ombudsman, and the human rights say there's a need for a law, but the Constitution of the Republic, on a day like yesterday, February 27th, could well offer these pardons and contribute to improve the situation. Likewise, honorable commissioners, we're asking that you consider the injustice in these prisons, which, as the distinguished colleague said, there are two systems in a single system, which can only be found in the Dominican Republic. So there are some centers, and the representatives from the state know this well, where the so-called CCRs, which are the new model centers, have the conjugal cells, while in the old model, or the CPL as we call it according to the new law, which still exists in some of the other prisons. And I'm happy to see the general subdirector of the prisons is here, and he says that this has been abolished. But what we're asking is that they allow conjugal cells in those centers as well, so that those deprived of their freedom can have access to their sexual relations. We also propose that there is an urgent need for the authorities to judicially and legislatively and administratively take the necessary steps to contribute to eradicate those poor practices of crowding, which, because of the judge's decisions, don't take into consideration elements that are almost a universal figure, like the legality, the proportionality, etc. I mean, I'm going too fast because I know my time is almost up, but we're almost concluding. And we're also proposing that now the outgoing authorities who left these incoming authorities with 7 centers, and yet in almost 4 years, not a single center has been completed, and all of them are partially completed, up to 80%. And the directors who are here know that, and there's been no way for them to complete this. As a result of this thematic hearing, the president announced that he was going to invest in Apata, which will contribute to the largest prison, where 3 billion pesos were being spent. And that's why, under other circumstances, the state receives enormous amounts of resources. He is proposing that he's going to complete some of these facilities. We think that if those 7 facilities are completed, we would really be overcoming the crowding, because all of these facilities are going to have space for about 10,000. So if we apply the pardon plus some other measure, we might be able to overcome the problem of the crowding. And if that was the case, we wouldn't have to be here today.
Comisionado. También estamos planteando un elemento de fondo, que en lo que eso se resuelve, hemos proporcionado que debe sacarse la policía de los centros penitenciarios. ¿Qué resulta? Allá hay 3 niveles de seguridad. Uno lo tiene los centros que hemos contribuido, que se le llaman los vigilantes de tratamiento penitenciario. Muy bien, una labor extraordinaria y una buena práctica en la que nosotros reconocemos. Pero ¿qué resulta? Que hay una parte de los centros que están bajo la guardia. Y ahí ni el director, y lo sabe mi distinguido y colega y amigo, ni el director manda en esos centros. A veces se le ha impedido a la Comisión de Derechos Humanos de la Cámara de Diputados su entrada. Y aún interviniendo el distinguido director del sistema penitenciario lo han dejado entrar. Pero hay otro sistema que es peor, que son los que están bajo la custodia policial. Ahí ni hablar y que por razones de tiempo no podemos detallar. Entonces estamos planteando la eliminación de esos centros y que en consecuencia pasen aún nosotros conociendo las dificultades del sistema penitenciario, al igual que estamos planteando, lo dejo ahí, sigo ahí, entonces esa eliminación. Estamos planteando también que el Estado...
I'm sorry, I will have to interrupt you. Thank you. You have another time. You have more minutes in the future.
Perfecto.
Thank you very much.
Gracias.
And now, Ambassador, I turn over to you and the representatives of the state.
Buenas tardes, señora.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Commissioners, Executive Secretariat, petitioners. We have a high-level delegation with me, with members of the Attorney General's Office of the Penitentiary Services and Correctional Services Agency and from the Judiciary of the Dominican Republic to respond to the convening of this meeting. The Dominican Republic is a firm defender of human rights and has shown throughout of its high commitment not only to human rights but also to democracy. Our President Luis Abinader and his administration are firmly convicted that democracy is what best guarantees dignity, well-being, and the happiness of people. It is only possible to sustain it if it is made deeper and broader. We also fervently believe in the principle of equality and non-discrimination as the fundamental pillar of human dignity, a principle which is the main pillar of our Constitution. In this regard, we make every effort constantly to guarantee its full enforcement. Regarding penitentiary conditions, we must say that we have implemented significant legal reforms like Law 5321 that regulates the correctional and penitentiary system of our country. This law, along with our vision of changing a paradigm in penitentiary management, is focused on respect and guarantee of the fundamental rights of persons deprived of freedom. With the purpose of improving the conditions of persons deprived of freedom, and with the firm political will of the government, we are working progressively in restructuring our penitentiary facilities, creating new penitentiary rehabilitation centers, meeting international standards that are recommended by the United Nations. Additionally, we have undertaken remodeling projects, expansion projects, and construction projects for this type of infrastructure throughout the country. We must highlight that we are aware of the challenges we face, especially given the fact that there is overcrowding in some of our penitentiary centers. However, we want to assure you that we're taking concrete actions to address this issue, including implementing education, health, work, and recreation programs with the purpose of promoting social reinsertion of persons who are deprived of freedom. In terms of health, we have strengthened medical care in penitentiary centers, guaranteeing access to specialized medical services and medications to those who need them. Likewise, we have set forth education and labor training programs for the purpose of providing personal and professional training opportunities for those who are deprived of freedom. Regarding access to justice, we have implemented measures to streamline legal processes and to guarantee due process to everyone, including those who are living in a situation of preventive holding. We are working with the judiciary to improve the efficiency and the transparency of our criminal justice system. In summary, Madam Chair, the Dominican Republic is fully committed to the protection and promotion of rights of every person, including those who are living in a situation of deprivation of freedom. And we are strongly working to improve the conditions in penitentiary centers. We thank you for your attention to this very important issue. Madam Chair, in order to provide clarity to the statements by the petitioners, I would like to give the floor now to the Director of Penitentiary and Correctional Services, Dr. Roberto Hernandez. Thank you, Ambassador. Greetings to the distinguished commissioners and to everyone who is with us today during this thematic hearing. We are pleased to be with you, to be able to speak to you and explain the penitentiary reality of the Dominican Republic at this time. Allow me to tell you that the Dominican state has expressed with facts and results its intention and resolve of solving a debt by a decades-long debt of the state towards its people. Through Decree 400-20, with the main purpose of supporting and implementing a reform to contribute to citizen security, to promoting dignity in the respect to dignity of those who are in conflict with criminal law. We are showing you videos that show coverage in the press in the Dominican Republic that show evidence of what we have stated. We would like to show our will to be open, to have transparency through the actions that the Dominican state is showing during our administration, and we have done so by opening 2 new offices for independent human rights ombudsmen at our request at the 2 centers that in these 2 emblematic centers, La Victoria and Erasmus was mentioned before. Since 2020, in penitentiary centers, there is a population of 27,198 adults. So far, as of 2023, we have 25,686 persons, with a net reduction of about 1,600 persons who have been deprived of their freedom, one of the countries in Latin America that saw a decrease in post-pandemic incarceration rates. We also wanted to state that the persons who are deprived of their freedom are placed in 46 centers for adults and 6 for adolescents in conflict with the law that are specifically regulated by laws, by separate laws in our country. We must recognize that the level of overcrowding that we have acknowledged through before the world and before NGOs in the Dominican Republic is something that has been carried forward since the dictatorship. And as a result of a need of spaces, we need over 9,900 units for these inmates, and that contributes to overcrowding. And as most Dominicans know, the Ministry of Housing has worked on establishing and closing down 11 penitentiary centers with a 18-month roadmap with an investment of 375,000 Dominican pesos. In the video, you can see inaugurations of NGOs have been invited to, without an exception, for inaugurations and 3 openings of some of the centers. And as you see, this is happening, and we opened the Yasmin new penitentiary center, which added 180 new units, which with a reduction of overcrowding. We have inaugurated the provisional holding center and preventive center in called Zona 9. We have also opened throughout this period a provisional holding center in Santiago de los Caballeros. We have also opened a center for provisional holding in Bate Bienvenido, and number 4. We opened Center for the Elderly in Bate Bienvenido, and this has provided more dignity to them, and they are working with corrections officers, and this means that we will be all opening a new mental crisis center specifically for that purpose, as we said before. Regarding processes for healthcare, we will talk to you about mental health care, and which is mostly focused on treatment. We created specialized treatment centers for mental health cases. In La Victoria and La Jairo for women, we have specific centers for mental health. With the approval of the Attorney General, we approved a 400,000 Dominican pesos monthly for giving care, specialized care for those who do not have insurance, and it's focusing on mental health, and you can see it in each of these correction centers. So you can see that in spite of having received a system where those deprived of freedom only had a subsidized insurance program, and we didn't have even 200 of them, and now we have 20,000 of them who are subsidized. We also are subsidizing the rations for 31,600 rations per meal, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And in healthcare, we can talk about the quality diet for each person, but the feeding is not a problem in our centers, and this is something that you can see for yourselves. This is not a panacea. We can't turn back time, but our vision is actually showing you what the actions of the states is achieving to that end. In summary, in terms of education, the adult population is we have 356 students, 12,000 in high school programs, and 2,000 are in medical healthcare professions. 7,200 are in technical courses in ICT, and 40 of the inmates have graduate degrees and master's degrees. So you are able to see here that the population has had the opportunity to have access to paid work, and it has given jobs to 5,000 persons who are deprived of freedom in the penitentiary centers, and over 2,000 have paid work as a result of the approval of judges so they can engage in a job outside of penitentiary centers. And in closing, I would like to express to you that the Dominican society and the penitentiary system in the Dominican Republic has a roadmap, a plan that was sponsored on the methodology that was approved by CIDH, an international cooperation agency that has been shared with all members of civil society, with a plan for 2024-2028 8, where all of the needs will be, there's a budget for each, there's objectives, standards, measurement metrics, and so on. And this is in our report. So thank you very much. And to close the presentation of the state, I will give the floor now to Magistrate Danisa Cruz, Director of the Human Rights Center and the Reinsertion of Repatriated Citizens Unit. Thank you. Good afternoon, commissioners, members of the Dominican delegation, representatives of civil society, and online participants. As a representative of the Attorney General, it's a privilege to talk to you regarding something that is so important to human rights, which is something that accepts not only the Dominican Republic, but also many other countries in the world. Throughout the past 2 decades, the Dominican Republic has worked without rest to improve the conditions of inmates in our correctional institutions. We are committed through a reform, a penitentiary reform based on human rights, implementing structural standards and structural and educational goals with the purpose of establishing policies and programs that ensure the respect of human rights, the physical and psychological integrity of inmates, as well as their social reinsertion. My presentation will focus on the role of the Attorney General's office in due process and alternative measures to preventive holding. The government has prioritized political prosecution, but we're looking for agreed upon practices that respect the rights of the parties. We have used legal figures such as consolidation, the criterion of opportunity, the convention of procedures, and the penal and criminal processes. We also guarantee the representation of victims in the process. We have many agreements in 2023 with the commitment of the system for peaceful conclusion of these processes. Only 1.5% of the cases in the Dominican Republic are taken to court, and most of these cases are related to serious crimes such as drug trafficking, money laundering, gender violence, sexual violence, grand larceny, homicides, and kidnappings. We have a chart with statistics. The Attorney General of office with all of the judges and courts in cooperation with civil society international organizations have benefited hundreds of thousands of persons throughout the country with alternative solutions. As established in the penal code, we can say that consolidation is conflict resolution for minor crimes, and over 15% of the cases that happen in our country are solved through this means. In 2023, in our country, we saw over 8,000 cases through mediation, which is the axis of the criminal policy of the state. We created the conflict resolution process to give a fast and effective solution to cases and solve differences and conflicts among the parties without necessary to litigate. In the past months, we have trained over 2,700 persons as conflict mediators in the country. Regarding the criterion of opportunity, which is the faculty given to the Attorney General's office to not go to the criminal means and subject to jurisdictional control. In 2023, 2,140 criteria of opportunity were applied for cases for controlled substances and other minor crimes. This figure has been used in cases of organized crime with legal control always. Regarding the procedures, which is one of the most applied solutions in the Dominican Republic, this is applied to the requests of parties or the ex officio. And we had 145 cases of conditional suspension for 2023 applied to minor crimes that where you can apply this legal figure. According to the partial abbreviated cases, we can apply this to cases of certain gravity. These criminal cases cannot be reconciled as much because, given the defense, these processes are usually litigated instead of reaching this type of agreements. The rules for these agreements are established in Articles 364 and 365 of the Criminal Code. In 2023, we had over 1,000 agreements with this alternative solution. No criminal code has a guarantee to provide alternative solutions as the Dominican Republic has, but we must recognize the fact that these measures can be improved, because currently we have over 17,000 persons who have been granted non-freedom deprivation measures, and that is to say that they have to respond to the process, but they never show up. The public ministry is committed to the respect of the human rights of all persons involved in the criminal process, including the accused and victims. Our objective is to address the needs of the correctional system and to work jointly for fairer and more inclusive solutions. Thank you. We now give the floor Neira Paulina, Director of Human Rights of the Ministry of Foreign Relations. Thank you, Ambassador. It is a pleasure for me to be before this commission. I would like to say in this following minute and a half that we have the interest of the Dominican government in holding an open and timely dialogue always with civil society and with the Commission as well. We have taken due notes of the statements given to us and the concerns. We recognize the importance of listening to all perspectives, and we're committed to addressing each complaint with due seriousness. And we want to say that the Dominican Republic is fully committed to human dignity, as civil society states. The issue of overcrowding and other problems related to the conditions of the deprived of freedom. We would like to say that the government is fully committed to the human rights of persons, and it is important to highlight that while we see that there are challenges in this regard, it is necessary to address them from a perspective that is comprehensive and objective, considering the measures that have been implemented to improve the conditions in penitentiary centers in compliance with international standards. That is why we emphatically reject any affirmation that does not fully reflect reality or that omits the progress made and lessons learned by the Dominican government to implement effectively and constructively all lessons learned. We would also like to go back to our commitment and reiterate our commitment of cooperating with the Commission to strengthen the communication channels and our commitment to human rights. We are committed and convinced that together we can make significant progress in the protection of fundamental rights. We are at the end of this intervention. We are going to be giving you some documents which will expand on the position of the Dominican state with provable evidence of everything that we have set forth today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And now I turn over to my colleague, Commissioner Rallon, who is the rapporteur for the rights of persons deprived of liberty. Go ahead. Oh. And also the country rapporteur. Thank you. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Commissioner Rallon, Rapporteur for the Dominican Republic and also Rapporteur for Persons Deprived of Freedom. I would like to send my greetings not only to civil society organizations and to the representatives of the state, special greetings to the ambassador of the Dominican Republic. Regarding this issue, I have taken due note of both presentations and also of the proposals, which I know will be complemented with a document at the end. We have heard, however, a set of data and a set of conditions laid forth, which shows what civil society has presented in terms of the significant challenges regarding the use of preventive prison, overcrowding rates, and specific vital rights in terms of feeding, water, access to water. And we have also seen the requests they presented and suggested some lines of action that the Commission, after this hearing, might be able to find a follow-up mechanism for the issues brought forth. On the other hand, the state has given us a presentation which is very complete with data, with actions that have been engaged in. In that presentation, we have heard of a plan of action that they have for 2024 to 28, and their efforts to coordinate with the judiciary. They also manifested their will and their openness to have an ongoing dialogue. This is my 5th year in the Commission. In the 4 prior years, I have been in charge of this rapporteurship of persons deprived of freedom. I think that all of us here are aware of the fact that there are challenges in penitentiary systems which are not particular to a specific state, but rather it is a regional condition. It is a condition throughout the region, and the only way in which we can address it is by having a roadmap or a plan of action which will enable them to take actions which can in turn solve some of the structural failures, which could be a regulatory fashion. Others are related to the budget. Others could relate to interinstitutional coordination, which needs to be more effective. The Inter-American Commission on Human Rights has a set of instruments in the framework of its competence that places at the service of civil society and the states as well to address these issues. From a collaborative vision, these can all, they can resort to technical assistance mechanisms. If a state has a plan of action like this pluriannual plan, the Commission and that ongoing dialogue can search for possibilities to provide or offer technical assistance that can lead to progress in concrete lines that have been set forth in the plan. Likewise, in regards to the willingness of being open to ongoing dialogue, spaces can be provided for training officials, not only in terms of security throughout the different levels in the penitentiary system, but also at the judiciary in order to improve decision-making processes or the enforcement of alternative measures to preventive incarceration. In terms of the excessive use of conditions that we have heard about, the only way to tackle them is through action. And let me tell you that we have seen willingness on behalf of the Commission. We're at your disposal for holding this type of ongoing dialogue. And it's important to, as civil society representative said, that perhaps we will be able to continue following up on this conversation, but also with actions that the Commission can support. In the end, we all have the same objective, which is to improve the penitentiary systems according to Inter-American standards, so that given the reality we have today, it can be transformed into a holding where on the basis of dignity and with technical enforcement of the law. When the Commission provides this collaborative vision and is allowed to cooperate, it can be an excellent mediator to be able to facilitate interinstitutional coordination, which is difficult if there is no view to that inter-American system, which is more coordinated. I'd like to thank everyone for their presentations, for the figures that they have given us, and I'd like to state our commitment and will by the Commission to address this in a collaborative and technical way in abidance of inter-American standards. Thank you.
Commissioner.
Muchas gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you very much, Chair. I also wanted to speak first by thanking the petitioners for being here and also thanking the state for taking this hearing so seriously and sending us not only the head of the mission and Ambassador Senior and the competent authorities who come to talk to us and to bring us up-to-date information on the subject. I must say that my past life as a magister of the Constitutional Court of Colombia, the judge in the Constitutional Court, one of my jobs at the time was to be in the follow-up court for prisoners, the famous structural prisons case in Colombia, and that's why I know so much about this. In fact, at the time I recall traveling to the Madre Maestra University in the Dominican Republic to offer classes. And I was asked precisely about this case, which is one of the most well-known structural cause cases of the Constitutional Court of Colombia. That's why I know that this is a case which is not easy to solve to begin with. I mean, I'm going to give my points of view. I don't think that there's a simplistic solution of let's pardon everyone and that's it. That's inconceivable. The state has the duty to protect its citizens and the duty to comply with the criminal law. And that's one of the things that the state must do based on the Democratic Charter and based on the Human Rights Convention. Second, it's a structural problem because it is a violation of many rights of many people who are deprived of their freedom because the crowding, the food conditions, the lack of education, health, the development of their personality and what have you. And third, it has several levels of possible solutions. Public policies, which are very expensive, as we know, like to build the prison infrastructure to maintain it, and something as simple as the criminal policy. Or design this criminal policy, which is something, amongst other things, that is not within the hands of the executive branch, because here we're in the presence of people who are not the people who decide that, because the criminal law is legislative. It's the Congress who must establish the criminal laws, and in that respect, one would have to have Congress here to convince them that they had to change their criminal laws in the state. So I recognize this is a structural problem, very difficult to solve, and as Commissioner Ralón said, it's a regional problem because in all countries of Latin America one could have a similar hearing with similar comments and similar results. Now, what are some of the concrete items that I'd like to refer to and which have to do with both sides here? First, as I mentioned, this is not going to be solved with a simplistic solution. Second, we must bear in mind that the state has the responsibility to guarantee and protect the lives of people who are deprived of their freedom and have to use the public force for that. In fact, under certain circumstances, the police, and if that's what's necessary to protect the lives of people who are deprived of their freedom. And I don't want to take too long, and I don't want to go to any examples in the continent, but there are up-to-date cases that are tragic of massacres in jails, precisely because the state has not had the necessary control of their prisons, and in order to control the prisons, it needs its law enforcement. Secondly, there are certain things that one could rethink. First, of course, we need to develop the infrastructures, the possibilities of maybe finding public-private partnerships where one could get maybe private investment for the development of the infrastructure. There are some models that have managed to attract that type of private investment. Second, to open space for discussion of legislative policies to see whether, for example, it would be possible to reduce preventive prisons in many of the cases where they are unnecessary. Third, and something which, as a rapporteur of the rights of persons with disabilities, is a very sensitive issue, is the deinstitutionalization of persons who are disabled, mentally disabled, and who are in institutions. This is something that I think the Commission could help with as well, with some type of technical cooperation. But, of course, all of these are some very marginal aspects that recognize that this is a really complex problem. And I can tell you, and I'll end with that in Colombia, the convictions of the Constitutional Court ended by using a rule which we called the rule of the decreasing equilibrium to decrowd the jails, which is that the number of people that enter the jail every week has to be less than the number of persons who leave the jail. So the tragic consequence of the rule is that the police stations who don't have the necessary infrastructure are full of people who are waiting to be put into jail. So right now, all the police stations, or URIs as we call them in Colombia, have people that have no food, no water, no medical services, nothing. So there's no magic formula. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Bernal. And for those online, this is Roberta Clark speaking. I want to say, I agree with my fellow commissioners that this is not an issue just for the Dominican Republic. This is an issue for the region, for the entire region, for the Americas and the Caribbean. In fact, just recently I was watching a documentary on prison conditions in the southern United States, and it could be everything that we heard here today. The thing is that we're living in the world, in a part of the world where we have historic inequalities. We have lack of state capacity to meet all the needs for education, proper health care, for good access to justice. And we also are in a region where organized crime, how we have to say, is getting quite a firm grip on our countries. So this is not a problem that's going to go away soon. And I just want to say at the outset, the solution does not lie in prisons and in prison walls. The solution is in socioeconomic policies. So I just want to say this is part of the complexity. And I say that because as I was listening to the presentation, and there's a significant degree and emphasis between the representatives of civil society and representatives of the state. The state, you're presenting your plans, your aspirations, your framework for resolving these issues. And civil society is presenting the reality of people here and now, how they're living in the moment. So the perspective is a bit different, but I have to say I'm compelled by the what is as the way in which I frame how I'm understanding what is going on, and all of the deficits, and I think about the gender differentials, although according to the statistics online, there's a small percentage of women incarcerated, but not having any access to feminine hygiene products, and the men, everything, the overcrowding, unsatisfactory drinking water, that you can just imagine the sanitation. We just have to put ourselves in that framework, right, to feel what that is like. So I went back just to see what the Commission has the Commission addressed this issue before for the Dominican Republic, and I did find, in fact, it did in 1999. I don't know, Maria Claudia, if that was the focus of the entire report, but there's a 1999 report further to country visits. And everything that was said here today is in that report. I was quite amazed. It's so similar, including the recognition of the difficult context, the complexity, the structural issues, the cultural issues, the anachronistic systems, insufficient resources, all of the things that have been checked here were checked in '99. And if you read the report, we can see a lot about the plans to build new prisons, justice reform. It's a lot of it is here. So, and of course, a lot of that is resource dependent. And we are living in small island developing states where we may not have all the resources we need to do all the things that we want to do. But I really wanted to ask since 1999, what have been the factors that may have hindered the state from implementing in the way in which it has wanted to implement some of the reforms that would address the question of prison conditions? And then I also would like to really say the countries where there's a lot more equality, unsurprisingly, there's very small prison population. I don't want to compare our small Caribbean states with the Nordic countries, but those Nordic countries which invest a lot in social equity, they don't even believe in incarceration. So they have other ways of dealing with that. I'm not saying that we're there yet in this region, but I think we're going to have to stop thinking about, it's a very colonial thing, that harsh punishment is what we do with people who are in conflict with the law. And is it what we want to be doing with young people? Adolescents, older youth. So it's just something I'm asking from the sociological part of my life. How do we address this problem, which is not about building prison walls and adding mattresses, though we need to do that, but is that where our solution will lie in the end? So I want to stop there. I've spoken too much, and I want to turn over to Maria Claudia, and also to maybe tell us about the report of 1999.
No, sí, muchas gracias, Presidenta. Bueno, primero que todo.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Well, first of all, I want to greet the representatives of the state and the representatives from civil society and say that, yes, the Commission has been following the situation of prisoners in the Dominican Republic for over 20 years. And after the report of 1999, the Commission did do an in situ visit, a working visit in 2006 to the Dominican Republic, seeing, in fact, that they had advanced in the penitentiary reform, and we were able to visit some of the new penitentiary centers with a new model, but they remained with the old model with all the problems and all the same situations that the people from civil society as well as the Commissioner just spoke of. So in that longitudinal outlook, this hearing is very relevant because it updates the situation and maybe allows us to speak of possible proposals that civil society are offering in dialogue, expressing their concern and their possible technical cooperation with the thematic and country rapporteur. Well, I have only 42 seconds, but there were certain key elements that I felt were important. So there is a difference, for example, between the quotas maintained to solve the crowding situation. I mean, the civil society speaks of 16,000 and the state says 9,000, so there's a different number. From my point of view, it seems to be a good news, but how can we match these two figures? How can we harmonize these two, these data, and maybe consider the possibility of finding penitentiary benefits? Do they exist? Do they not? What are the real possibilities within the legal framework of the pardon, for example, that other countries may use or not? Bearing in mind all the information, because there could be maybe 2,000 people that could be free already, benefiting from that. So, Madam Chair, that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maria Claudia. And so now I turn back over to civil society. You have 12 minutes. And similarly for the state.
I think
País y lo privado.
That the country and those deprived of freedom in the Dominican Republic, after this thematic hearing will win already. Because first of all, it's been public. The fact that this hearing is taking place is public. The president spoke. And in so doing, as per the human rights information, he knows that what was happening, and he knew that we would be meeting here with the commission here, look at the state, look at civil society. And I want to thank the president of the person responsible for the region, for the International Federation of Human Rights, whom we had asked for the visit, and this is the only human rights organization of the Dominican Republic, and we've asked her for her help. And I have to say, we feel very proud of having our colleague Jimena Perez with us here. She came from the headquarters of the FDIH to support us here. Let me tell you, honorable commissioners, as civil society, we welcome the dialogue. And I think that for the state, we've always heard each other, because since 2004 to date, in fact, I went back to the university and studied the penitentiary system because I'm passionate about it. But I'm sorry, there's a noise and I can't hear him. There's sound coming in and I cannot follow him. This is a problem with the Zoom. They have to correct this. I'm going to be brief because I know there's problems with the time. But I would like to show you who has the truth in their hands and who doesn't. I can tell you what's happened. Now, with the constitutional period, and I'm not going back in history where we know there has been progress. The first thing is what the president did, and the state knows that because they know the relationship that the Commission of Human Rights has with the state. What did the president say? Well, what do we have to do? We said, look, President, we have to put an end to the penitentiary reform. And what did he do? He enacted a law, which is the one we've referred to. Where did that decree end up? 4 years after his work, after all the years I've worked to do this? And the state knows that. That's in the drawers, in the pockets. They created a penitentiary table where we were part of. Where's that? That's gone. And the country and the Dominican society and the international community are still waiting to hear what happened with that table. Why did it close itself to dialogue? And the result was an expert whom you know well, Roberto Santana, and that was left in the cemetery, and that was the end of that. We made all sorts of efforts, but all insignificant, and we recognize that. But after that, we have had workshops and courses on human rights, and we've spoken to the president about this, and we have visited him, and we've done vigils and walks and everything, and we've never been heard. As we say in the Dominican Republic, the snake is not cut by the tail. You have to cut it by the head. And since they closed the possibility of dialogue with the state because they weren't hearing us, they were just trying to drive us nuts. So we are in a position to talk to them because in the end, what we want is to find a solution to this problem for these people who need this help. Because if I tell you that our centers after 8 p.m., if you get sick, you're going to die because there's no way of transferring them somewhere, just to give you an example, that could be solved. And we understand that many of the things that have been brought up have some truth in it and some that are not truth. But we can't go into details because we know that there are the hearings and we cannot go into the details right now. But so what we're proposing is what we originally said, that there are truths on both sides because it's very simple. The problem of crowding, for example. Let's take the amount that they say, the amount whom we admire and respect because we've worked together in civil society, and he knows that. Haven't we worked together, engineer? We have. And needless to say that with our human rights prosecutor, and I mean, we haven't even talked about preventive prisoner. I thought we were going to hear something about that, but we didn't. But anyway, we're giving one figure. You don't have to believe us, but at least you see the reality of every 100 preventive prisoners, and let's say that's only 70% are preventive. That's unacceptable. That's what we say. And who's to blame? There is a shared responsibility between the public ministry and the justice system, which represents one of the branches of the state of the Dominican Republic, of the Constitution of the Dominican Republic. So there's a problem there when there are judges who have their writings, and we'll show you that, to speak of the rule of law. And I can tell you, look, you have to see this report of 2023, because it's wonderful to come here and say that the Dominican Republic has rights and that we fight for them. But when you see in practice, honorable commissioners, and we're going to leave this document with you, of the ombudsman, so that you can see the penitentiary situation as such. So we're not going to refer to so many other things. What we want is that the commission, as they've done in the past, can do some kind of follow-up of this situation, as they did in '97, I believe in 2006, and that we should do something. We thank you for hearing us, for hearing the state, for reading our documents, and that as commissioners, you can try, and hopefully the state will accept it, because sometimes they refuse it, that you can come to the Dominican Republic not to do any harm, not to, as we say in the Dominican Republic, to find the problems. No, because we, in protecting the human rights, and I can say it with my colleague here, what we're looking for are solutions. We know they're not easy. We know it's structural. But, honorable commissioners, in one single center, they spent 6 billion pesos to solve the problem of La Victoria. And in 4 years, and they've done nothing. As you said, to spend 6 billion pesos, it's not his fault. It's the state's fault. And then they abandoned it. And I was there, and I can tell you, and the judge knows that, because she knows what they did. It was only 80% completed, and then they left it. But to leave it, and it's being said that they're going to complete it now. Well, let's complete it. If the state agrees honestly before you to complete the 7 centers that are 80% completed, they would already resolve a problem of the director of the penitentiary center, because La Paca only allows for 8,000. 8,000 are not going to fit. That was something they didn't ask the experts about. But there are at least 7,000 spaces there that could find a solution, because if we take the 25,000 and try to overcome the crowding, and we take, as the director said, who manages the data, because he goes in and out, if we have close to 25,500, the prosecutor's office only has space for 12,000 plus. So we have a problem of 13,000. If we have those 7 and we build another 10, we'd solve the problem. We'd be talking about only 3,000. With the steps that we're suggesting, which are not outside the Constitution, and we're not talking about deprived of their freedom who've committed tremendous crimes. No. Maybe we wouldn't be here if that were the case, or maybe we could have found a solution.
Aparte de reiterar,
aside from reiterating, what we want is a sincere dialogue. We want a dialogue that is going to help us, not find solutions, but at least help us, and that they don't go with what they did with the decree or the law 113 that they didn't follow, and the table that was interrupted, because in that way we're never going to advance. We were advancing and everything was stopped. Thank you, Chair. And our colleague Vicky Valdez has a photograph that's on the screen right now, and it's showing specifically the Women's Center in Montecristi. What you see there is where they bathe. 30 women, around 30 women bathe in the same bathroom under inhuman conditions. These photographs were sent by us, the Ombudsman's department, where in a single bathroom, the 30 women also go to do their physiological and cleaning and bathing. There's a tank for the women to bathe, where the amount of germs you find there is incredible. Today, the state spoke of the penitentiary system of Alice in Wonderland, I'm sorry, where everything is beautiful and perfect and happy and wonderful. But in that place where you see those photographs, there are 30 women without any privacy, no protection, and they have these 3-leveled bunk beds, and that's the situation of the women in one of the centers. But there is the new model as well, which we recognize has some type of dignity. But, honorable commissioners, what happens, as the rapporteur said, is that in 2004, the new model was established. But instead of evolving towards the new model in all the centers, we have been evolving. In other words, the authorities, and the Dominicans know this quite well, those deprived of freedom in the new model have now certain practices which could not even be conceived in the past, like drugs in these centers in the new penitentiary model, the abusive use of mistreatment and torture and blows. I mean, you go in there and they place them there and they hit them with these tubes. And those that are deprived of their freedom can spend up to 3 months in a punishment cell. So instead of evolving to a system which was the panacea in the region, we have gone backwards and we're going downwards. We know that this is a structural problem, but as the National Commission of Human Rights, we have been following the state trying to find solutions, real solutions for this. But we were forced, as we say here, to bring this to the international organizations because we have not been heard as we should have been, because we are the voice of the voiceless. Those who are deprived of their freedom cannot come here before you or before the commissioners to show the truths of their life. This is a reality. In the Dominican Republic and the public ministry that's represented here always asks for preventive prisoner against anyone. 99.9% ask for preventive prison for those deprived of freedom, and the judges impose about 88.5% of preventive prison, when the law itself that they have established, which is the law says that freedom should be the goal, should be the rule, and that prison should be the exception, according to Article 22 of the criminal process. And it's exactly the opposite. That's why there's so much crowding, and that's why the food situation is terrible. There's no type of optimum nutrition for those deprived of their freedom. Thank you very much.
Over to you, Ambassador, representative of the state.
Gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to refer to the preventive prison, and for that I'd like to give the floor to Modesto Martinez, an advisor of the judiciary. But before I do that, I would like to clarify or reiterate the willingness to dialogue. The state is here, has always come to the Commission because we are willing to dialogue here and in the Dominican Republic. The authorities present here today have always had open doors, not only for the Commission, but for other actors who may have concerns or have challenges, and we're willing to talk and find joint solutions to those things that affect us, and we don't deny them. None of the authorities have denied the existence of these problems. I wanted to clarify that and reiterate our willingness to talk. Dr. Martinez has the floor. Thank you very much, Madam Ambassador, and a cordial greeting to the commissioners and the members of civil society and members of this delegation, the public, the people online. We want to thank you for coming here today, and we want to take advantage of this moment to go on record with certain aspects that could be of interest to manage this issue. Firstly, in the judiciary, as you well know, there is a participation quota in all aspects related to a person being in prison, and the prison decisions are established by the judges. And as per the new code, there is a custody issue with the judge, who also participates by supervising some of the penitentiary centers. From the judiciary, we've made all efforts to reduce the problem of the orders the freedom orders, implementing case management system, trying to optimize the prisoners' process. And last year, in fact, we issued 2,203 freedom, granting of freedom to 22,203. As for preventive prison, this should be seen in context. What the claimants say about the preventive prison is something that actually it concerns all of us, but I think it would be very useful if we could establish the necessary segregation and establish the necessary responsibilities so that the Commission would have the necessary tools to understand this problem. So when we speak of preventive prison or preventive prisoners, we'd have to clarify how long they have remained in that condition as preventive prisoners. If we could show that a person has been a preventive prisoner within the times established by law, then it's a question of the state, and maybe it's not. So we'd have to remove, subtract that from that. If we're talking about 26,000 inmates, and we're talking about 2,000 or 3,000 in the last 6 months, that they're within the right time, then what we'd have to do is reduce that to the complex universe of all those deprived of their freedom. But after that, then we have that figure, and then in that figure we'd also have to see what the situation of these is. And according to the law, it's the inmate himself who again creates that situation of him being a preventive prisoner. So when a person is convicted and makes use of the rights granted to him by the law itself, he has a right to resort to that decision. That turns him into a preventive process. So he remains as a preventive prisoner because of his own actions. So we can attribute that to the state. That's why, contrary to clarifying, I think it would be useful if the civil society would talk about prisoners with and without sentence, because that way the Commission could understand when is the state at fault and when not. It's at fault when it is not actually issuing the conviction adequately, and when they do it, then they don't execute it. But if there is an adequate conviction with the appropriate sentence, then the condition of preventive prisoner is eliminated. Now, if he resorts to the sentence, he again becomes a preventive prisoner, because as such, for a person to be completing his conviction, it has to be irrevocably judged. And as long as it doesn't have that hierarchy, the person is going to continue as a preventive prisoner.
This is one of the problems that we've spelled out as to why someone goes to jail and they end up being worse off when they leave, because nobody can force them for re-education measures be applied in their favor. So if I go to jail for 5 years in jail, nobody, and I feel that I am innocent, nobody will be able to help me because I feel I'm innocent. So out of those 25,000, if we were to exclude the 6,000 that were convicted in the past 6 months, and out of those 6,000, we'll have 20,000. Out of those 20,000, there's 15,000 that have been punished or convicted, but they have presented an appeal. And this is the discussion that we have on an ongoing basis compared to our attitude of respecting this commission. Even though many of the cases are taken from the media, and not all of them are fact-checked, because many of the media are not rigorous in the reporting, then we say there's no way of verifying the information. As the ambassador said, it's important to state that we recognize the authority of this entity, and we are fully willing to respond to the requirements placed on us, and that all the defendants present their case so that we can solve those issues, because we want to respect human rights in the Dominican Republic. Thank you, and we'd like to give the floor back to Dr. Hernandez, who is the director of the penitentiary system, to clarify some of the figures we heard. Thank you, Ambassador. Again, thanks to the commissioners. I want to reiterate the willingness of the state, in particular as a manager, as a manager of the penitentiary system, then tell you that we're fully willing to be transparent in answering all your concerns. There are no petitions that have not been submitted to investigation, even though it's just a verbal commitment. Regarding the response of the state, this is our plan, which is not issued. It was not issued after we were invited here, and as the ambassador said, it is a response by the state of the Dominican Republic in respect to the commission. We come here with official data, which is the willingness to provide transparency through our public transparency system in the Dominican Republic. For the penitentiary system, there we have 45 new remodeled centers, and until 2019, we started with a modern reform of the penitentiary system in the United Nations. In 2012, the United Nations recognized that we are a example of reforms, and we have assumed the responsibility in the penitentiary system, even in the throes of a pandemic, and we expedited all the processes and initiatives that were presented. And we have faced 27,000 inmates where we have shown them to all the parties necessary, the ombudsman, the public ministry, civil society, everyone. It's not up to me to invite them, but the judiciary is the one that's supposed to do so. I don't know why everyone doesn't come there to ratify that. We have a lack of space. We are still lacking over 9,000 spaces where we are going to fulfill this need with the opening of Las Parras Center with the capacity of 8,000 spaces, which will give us a lag of 1,100 spots still. The expansion in San Pedro is going to provide 290 new spots, and El Way is also going to have more space. So in the end, we'll have 11,700 new spaces. And I shouldn't talk about myself, but I'm a public servant, and nobody can force me to lie before you. You know me. Everyone knows me. I am not here to tell you lies. It's impossible. I would give up my position before I lie. So this is precisely what we have brought forth regarding the plan of action. We have said that we can free over 2,000 people, and we have presented a request by 2,000 in writing to the judiciary, and we haven't heard back from them. I close by saying that we are fully open to hear you. We want the same for the Dominican Republic citizens. We're trying to make all the efforts to protect this part of our society. Thank you.
La magistrada Cruz, por favor.
Sí.
Yes, in closing, I would like to reiterate how willing we are to speak and work together with any civil society organization on improvements. I cannot leave without saying that out of all the cases that we have convicted, 89% of those are related to drug trafficking, money laundering, aggravated theft, crimes against persons, serious crimes, and the data is here, and I will send it to you, where there's cases 30.12%, homicide, sex offenses, 2.92%, drugs, 22.71%, aggravated theft, 24.71%, and evidently, these are serious cases. They're egregious crimes, and we'll give you the official figures that we have. And bear in mind that the Ombudsman's office is definitely committed to dignity and respecting the human rights and the due process of all Dominican citizens. Thank you.
Señora Presidenta, gracias.
Madam Chair, thank you. I would like to tell you that we will be sending you a set of documents which are in support of everything that the state has stated here today in response to all the statements by civil society. Thank you.
So before I close, I would just like to ask Commissioner Ralón, Country Rapporteur, to make a final comment.
Muchas gracias, Presidenta. Yo quisiera
Thank you, Madam Chair. Very briefly, I would like to say that everything that has been shared here today shows that there are challenges which can be turned into opportunities for the respect of human rights more effectively through the work that the Commission is most willing to do, to carry out, if technical assistance and cooperation is requested of us. We have heard of the challenges, quite frankly, but we've heard about willingness also to work and make progress. And I just wanted to reiterate our willingness to provide technical assistance and training and to include it in our agenda.
If I may conclude and thank the representatives of civil society for your information, for your passion, for your commitment to the group of persons that you represent. And Ambassador, I would like to assure you that we really deeply appreciate the state's presence here, and just the size and composition of your delegation gives us a real good sense of your commitment, but also the recognition that this is a structural problem, and it's a problem not just of the Dominican Republic. It's a region-wide issue. And to the extent that you have the roadmap, Mr. Hernandez, we are going to be watching you closely to learn the lessons on the implementation of that roadmap, because if you are successful, it's a lesson for all of for the rest of the countries that are grappling with this deep problem. And I also want to thank you for your clarification on some of the statistics, and I look forward to any information that you all wish to send to the Commission so that we can deepen our analysis and be relevant in our technical support to the state. Thank you very much for the goodwill and for your presence. Good afternoon. Welcome to hearing number 13 in this 189th period of sessions of the Commission. And this is a regional hearing, and the hearing is on the impact of carbon market expansion on indigenous peoples and local communities in Colombia, Guyana, and Peru. The objective of this hearing is to inform the Commission about the human rights impact of the expansion of the carbon market in Latin America and the Caribbean, in particular, the three countries, Colombia, Guyana, and Peru. We will be having this hearing for an hour and a half, and this is how the methodology goes. Civil society will have 30 minutes. The state, I also want to recognize the members of the state who are here with us online as well as in the room. So states have 30 minutes to respond. Is this correct, Maria Claudia?
Yes.
And then civil society another 25 minutes.
It's regional.
Regional, yes, so regional,
state.
sorry, yes, I'm sorry.
State,
Yes, regional. So,
There is no
yes, I understand that. What is this?
The 30 minutes,
Yeah.
yes. The civil society.
Civil society, yeah. So civil society has 30 minutes, and then we have comments from the Commission, and then comments from civil society in response. And with that, I also want to, before I continue, to acknowledge and ask you to join with me in celebrating the 65th anniversary of the work of the Commission committed to the defense and promotion of human rights. This is our 65th anniversary. And of course, since 1959, we have quite an enviable body of work, and allow me to give you some statistics. More than 100 on-site visits with reports, more than 1,000 precautionary measures granted, more than 750 merit reports, 220 friendly settlements, and 377 cases sent to the Inter-American Court on Human Rights. All of this with victims at the center of our work and as our priority, but also, of course, supporting states in meeting their accountability for complying with regional and international human rights standards. So I'm sure that you are happy with me on the 65th anniversary of the Commission. Also, I want to give a short remark on accessibility. To ensure that this hearing is as inclusive as we can make it, we ask that all participants, before you make your presentation, to say your name, the position that you hold, the organization that you represent, and subsequently, anytime you take the floor, also to repeat your name, so that those who are visually impaired can identify who is speaking. Likewise, we remind you that these audiences will have Zoom subtitles, so those of us who are online, there are subtitles available, and if you need them, you can activate them directly on your computer, and you can also adjust the display size. For those who don't want to follow us on Zoom, we are available on live stream on YouTube as well as on Facebook, so you can join us there. And with that, I want to turn to the representatives of civil society, and your time begins. And please have a look at the clock, because you'll see where you are. Thank you.
Gracias, señora presidenta. Comisión.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioners. And thanks for this pair, where the leaders of the indigenous group, the Quimbolos, and representatives of civil society of 4 countries will share the way in which the expansion of carbon markets has affected their rights, territories, and modus vivendi. They will share the difficult need to align the needs to mitigate climate change with internationally accepted rights of indigenous people and traditional communities. At the hearing, they will see those expansions of this matter, how they violate their rights, their duty as buyers and sellers of carbon credits, and certification agency of respecting the rights of indigenous people and local communities, and the obligation of states of regulating and supervising the certification, licensing, and the transfer of these carbon credits, and the complaints mechanisms related to these credits. We'll see a video in a minute where Flavia Santos from Brazil will share her experience with us.
Senhoras comissionadas, prezados senhores comissionados.
I don't believe there is Portuguese in the room. at this time. So unfortunately, we might not be able to interpret this. So it has, Flavia Santo is a doctor in human rights at the Federal University of Pará. The attorney from Malungo, a coordination of the Quilombo communities partnerships in Pará. It began as a black woman quilombola from the river and Amazon. It's the first time that Malungo, acting in Pará in the Brazilian Amazon, occupies this space. And this is the result of the work with the partners and the social industrial partnerships and the fights of our Quilombola partnerships in Brazil, and with the national coordination of harmonization with the black rural Quilombola communities called CONACI. Brazil also adds a diversity of traditional people and communities, preserving and protecting all forms of life, making a sustainable use of natural resources. The territory for us, the people and traditional communities, is part of our land and our living. We are an extension of our forests and our rivers. We are the resistance and the live presence of our ancestry. In recent years, our communities have faced severe violations of their rights, perpetrated by companies, mostly without headquarters in Brazil, but seeking at all expense to sign contracts in the voluntary carbon market. Of the many violated rights, we highlight the violation of the right to the territory and environment. Our Quilombola communities traditionally, without government support, have helped in the preservation of the environment. These proposals do not respect the ancestry, violating the traditional practices, offering severe risks to the existence of these traditional communities. The attempt to market these common rights and the proposal for carbon credit markets in the voluntary market do not effectively add environmental preservation mechanisms and turns the nature of our territories into a market for the whole world to bargain without our having any control over these markets. There are limitations and risks to our traditional life. The carbon credit contracts in the voluntary market may damage the management practices in parts of the territory, having an impact on their way of life and the food security of our communities. The attack to the leaders of our communities, many of the members of the communities are attacked and receive false promises of profits to put pressure on them to sign these contracts that often are written in a language unknown to them, thus violating their social and territorial rights. The violation of consultation rights or their right to free, prior, and informed consent have not been respected when asking them to sign this contract of the voluntary market of carbon credits. On the contrary, they have frequently been violated. My Quilombola community, Rio Genupauba, which is located in the region of the Jabaitetuba municipality in the state of Pará in Brazil, built a prior, free, and informed consent protocol because we recognize that this is an essential instrument to defend the rights and guarantees of our territory, as well as the prior, free, and informed consultation as part of the protocol. Because of these and other violations of human rights, I respectfully ask the Commission to carry out a deep review of the situation in this situation of the carbon credits and recommend to the states effective measures to fight against the violation of the rights of the traditional peoples and communities, as well as the reparation of violations that have already taken place and are still taking place. And we want to thank you for this time, for this very urgent and necessary debate. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Marisol Garcia Pagueño. I'm from the Quichua people of the Peruvian Amazon, descendant of the Amazon people, the first populators of the Sanmartinense forest, indigenous who appear in the Jesuit stories and Antonio Raimondi in the 16th century. The people like Chasuta, Lama, Tabaloso, Chapaja, San Jose de Sisa have been historically documented and recognized because of our fights and resistance. And yet, the Environmental Ministry, the National Protected Areas Service, CERNAN, and the Preservation, Research, and Management of National Resources Center state that we only have existed when we were first recognized by the Peruvian state. We have more than 500 years of ancestral possession of a territory where each space has its identity. From the Shambuyaco Valley, Loponayo, Anayacu, El Chapacajal, Huicunguyo, Alto Mazapa, Cochayo, to Cushabatay, where our spiritual beings inhabit, and the extensive biodiversity, where we have the fishing and the hunting and our ancestral roads. In 2001, the Peruvian state created the natural protected area called the Blue Cordillera, Blue Mountain Range, which is part of our territory today, and since then has been altering our survival. Why can the Peruvian state take these lands from our people and create this natural protected area without considering the Agreement 169 of the ILO, violating the human rights of our people? Ladies and gentlemen, commissioners, it's regarding this structure that the park has been working by reducing the deforestation and forestal degradation emissions since 2008 within the framework of the United Nations Convention on Climate Change, where they also omitted this Convention 169 of the ILO, selling for millions of dollars the carbon bonds to the polluting enterprises of the North like Shell, Total Energy, BHP, and others. Gentlemen, commissioners, you know what a carbon bond is. You know how it's measured. Do you know how much it costs in the market? Because we don't know it. And we've had to go out to the Transparency Court to have access to this kind of information of who buys and for how much and how much do they buy. Information that should be public. The NGO, CERNAN, which manages this park, had refused to give us this information. Why hide from us? Why not be transparent with the Quichua indigenous group? That's why we reject these false solutions based on nature and the neutrality of carbon, which is useful only for the companies to take advantage of and benefit from. And they promote the destruction of our territory and violate our fundamental rights in complicity with the state. States like Peru, who work with the effective, that benefit from the work of our people, because we're the ones who defend the territory and our homes, and we have early warning systems by territorial patrolling and reforestation, promoting sustainable enterprises based on nature, led by women. And we ask ourselves then, where are the millions of these sales go to? Where are the $80.4 million for the sale of these carbon bonds of the Total Energy Company and the CIMA Company? Because the protection of the fathers has no investment whatsoever. CERNAN is exclusive in the management of the park and refuse us the right to mark our territory, frustrating our rights to legal safety. They care more for the interests of those companies who are damaging the image and have no transparency. The Quichua people insist that the Peruvian people should comply with their own rules and international conventions, to mark our ancestral people that was stolen from us by the park, implementing Resolution 136 Minagre, which is a rule allowing us to regulate and recover our territory from there. We believe that we should be recognized for full participation and distribution of benefits in a context of red mass. We ask the Peruvian state to regulate and supervise the red mass project within the national park of the Blue Mountain Range, or Cordillera Azul. Strong measures should be taken now against the limitless expansion of the carbon market bonds in our territory. Not finding false solutions based on nature. And now I give the floor to our brothers from Guyana. Thank you.
My name is Lekram Bagirat, and I'm from the Amerindian Peoples Association in Guyana. The Guyana delegation will be sharing our experiences with carbon markets developments in our country. In December 2022, a private US-based carbon credit certification body called ART, the Architecture for REDD Plus Transactions, certified 33.47 million carbon credits to the government of Guyana, retrospectively for the period 2016 to 2020. These are the first jurisdictional REDD Plus carbon credits to be issued in the world for sale in the voluntary carbon markets. These credits
Maybe you could slow down a little bit because we do have the interpretations happening as well.
I apologize. These are the first jurisdictional REDD Plus carbon credits to be issued in the world for sale in the voluntary carbon markets. These credits were generated from forests in Guyana, including all forests on indigenous peoples' titled and customary lands. The day after the certification was announced, the government signed a deal to sell 37.5 million carbon credits to Hess Oil. All of this was done without respecting the rights of indigenous peoples. We learned just today that ART has now issued a further 7.14 million carbon credits to Guyana for the year 2021. In its announcement today, ART claims that indigenous peoples were consulted on the government's REDD Plus initiative and are benefiting from it. I'm now handing over to Mr. Mario Hastings to speak about community experiences with this carbon scheme.
Good afternoon. My name is Mario Hastings. I am Akawayo from Kaku village, Upper Mazaruni, Guyana. I am Tushao of my village. I will share our experience with the carbon trading scheme in Guyana. As my colleague said, the government got carbon credits coming from indigenous people's lands certified by ART. The government says it did consultations with indigenous communities about this, but the meetings that the government calls consultations were not consultations, and so there was no free, prior, and informed consent. We did not receive sufficient information. Our people still have many questions and concerns about carbon credits and markets and what they mean for our lands, our livelihoods, our cultures, and our rights. The government says that indigenous peoples agreed to their plan to sell carbon credits because the National Tushaus Council, NTC, endorsed the plan. The NTC is a national body of indigenous village leaders. It has advisory functions only. I am a member of the National Tushaus Council Executive Committee. The government tries to say that NTC is the only legitimate representative of indigenous peoples, but that is not true. We have the right to decide how we want to make our collective decisions, and we have the right to choose our own representatives. The NTC has not been chosen by our villages to represent them and make decisions on their behalf on this matter. We at the NTC were presented with a resolution to endorse the government's carbon program, but we did not have an opportunity to understand and talk about it, to take it back to our communities to discuss what it means to them and to hear their views. It is wrong to say that all indigenous leaders in Guyana agreed to selling carbon from all of our forests, or even all indigenous leaders participated in the decision. The government also says that it is respecting our rights because it has a benefit sharing plan, but there was no FPIC for this. Our communities did not get a chance to help design this benefit sharing plan and tell the government what we consider appropriate compensation for having all of our forests included in the national carbon scheme. Even if some people are happy to receive some money from the carbon credit sale, we still don't know what the risks are for us. Finally, we have not seen any proof that selling carbon is helping Mother Earth. Even though the government is selling carbon credits and promising to keep the trees standing, the government continues to give out mining concessions without caring about destruction of our forests. For example, my village of Kaku is covered with mining concessions. We have a land title, but the government refuses to acknowledge that the title exists, and the government is now doing oil drilling and polluting the climate. In all these ways, our rights have not been respected and protected in this carbon credits process. The true solution to the climate crisis is to recognize that indigenous peoples are the owners and stewards of our lands and forests. Thank you for listening.
Decorum again. You have now heard about how indigenous peoples' rights were not respected in the National Red Plus program in Guyana. This was why the APA filed an official complaint to ART in March 2023. Unfortunately, ART did not address the substance of our complaint, which was that ART certified credits to Guyana despite violations of indigenous peoples' rights in our country and the lack of effective consultations with indigenous peoples as the owners of the land and forests. ART dismissed the complaint in May 2023. APA filed an appeal in June 2023. ART asked us to sign terms of reference for the appeal that would have made it all but impossible to expect a fair outcome. We made suggestions based on international standards for grievance mechanisms to improve the process, but ART refused our suggestions and dismissed the appeal when we explained that we could not agree to an illegitimate process. ART even claimed that the standards for grievance mechanisms do not apply to it. The case that we have presented serves as a warning that must inform global efforts to move away from the destruction of our nature and climate and towards just and sustainable societies. It shows that one of the leading jurisdictional Red Plus certification schemes, one that promotes itself for high integrity by aligning with the UN FCCC Cancun safeguards and international human rights laws, has facilitated the sale of carbon credits which are generated in violation of the rights of indigenous peoples. It shows that ART failed to act on information about the rights violations during the validation and verification process that led to the certification of credits. The world should learn that as an important lesson from this case that private self-selected and self-regulating bodies such as ART cannot be left to enforce compliance with a standard that speaks about human rights violations without sufficient expertise or oversight. Thank you, and I hand over to our friends from Colombia.
Good afternoon. We are Paulilish Vaca, Assistant Director of Justice, and Julian Trujillo, a researcher from the Gaia Amazona Foundation in Colombia. Our intervention will refer to three issues. First, governments and indigenous territories in the Red Plus model. Second, the regulation of the Colombian issue. And third, the Pirá-Paraná case in the Colombian Amazon. From its arrival to Colombia, the emission reduction, deforestation, and degradation of forest mechanism, Red Plus, has had several impacts on the territories and government systems and indigenous knowledge. It's a series of impacts that add to the historic discrimination of indigenous people, the difficulties they faced for their full exercise of their rights, and the deficit of effective protection by the state. The main problem of Red Plus is that the model in general and the projects in particular disregard the fundamental role played by indigenous people in the protection of life in the planet. These are excluded from the global debates on the effective solutions vis-à-vis climate change, relegated to policies formulated outside their territories. In this model, the external actors design projects, make decisions on the management of strategic life spaces for mitigation and adaptation to climate change, such as Amazon, thus disregarding the indigenous people that have traditionally inhabited and governed these areas. In fact, in the last 38 years, the indigenous territories of the Colombian Amazon have lost only 0.7% of the forest coverage. In the Amazon department, as well as Guyana and Vaupés, close to 98% of the forests are still up. In contrast, the dominant Red Plus model only sees in this territory an opportunity for business. The Amazon only seems to be valuable if it is part of a market. The explained situation takes place under the insufficient regulation by the state. Its current regulation in Colombia has a mechanism that allows it to work amongst themselves, self-regulated, with the developers, the certifiers, the verifiers, the marketers, disregarding the role of the indigenous people and their governments and their territories and the public, not private, nature of the environment and cultural diversity protection. Colombia still has no ruling for social and environmental safeguards agreed within the framework of the COP meeting of the Framework Convention of the United Nations of Climate Change 2010, nor are there any instruments as to the consequences and responsibilities of projects that violate the human rights or effective reparation mechanisms. These problems can be seen in the indigenous territory of the Pirá-Paraná. The first case selected by the Constitutional Court in Colombia on this is currently in process. The knowledge system of the Pirá-Paraná people in the Department of Vaupés is known by UNESCO as a national patrimony of mankind. It's the maximum body for decision-making. The indigenous territory has been affected by the formulation and development of the marketing by the Corporation for the Sustainable Management of Forests, mass forests and others, a project which was not approved by the indigenous government, contrary to the food safety and the knowledge of the territory, attempting against their systems and plans of life. In 2019, the Indigenous Council made the decision autonomously to structure a financial, diversified sustainability strategy to strengthen the governments in their territory, which includes the construction of a Red Plus project without intermediaries, project which would be an innovative experience in the world because its formulation, implementation, and distribution of benefits would be built by the territory and for the territory. Contrary to this autonomous decision, the private entity Mas Bosques developed a Red Plus project on the indigenous territory of Pirá-Paraná, as my colleague said, without the indigenous approval. Through a private mandate contract signed with a person who did not represent the territory legally, nor had the legal capacity to do so, the company formulated and registered the project, which was later verified and certified by Ruby Canyon Environmental and Serva Carbon companies. The credit carbons were issued in the name of Mas Bosques and not of the indigenous territory, and was finally sold to an intermediary, and then they resold to Delta Airlines. Furthermore, disregarding the indigenous government structure, the project forces the territory to reduce its chagras 3%, stating that these traditional ways would cause a deforestation. This is alarming because it attempts against the physical survival and cultural survival of the Pirá-Paraná. These elements show matters related to the limits of these climate change mitigation initiatives derived from the human rights framework and the need to establish standards for the protection of indigenous people.
The main challenge consists in the fact that indigenous people should be the main actors in the decision-making processes on climate change in their territories because they are collective subjects of their free determination and a government that is where they cannot be disregarded, especially when their knowledge has historically shown that there is a relationship of respect and harmony with nature, which is favorable for the protection of the life of the planet. Thank you very much for listening to us. I now give the floor to Cristina Gavancho. Thank you very much. Good morning and good afternoon, Cristina Gavancho. After hearing this, we ask the Commission as the monitoring and promotion body in the rapporteurship for the protection of human rights should establish policies that are specific on the access to right to information, transparency, and certification in the certification of carbon credits according to the Escazú Agreement and international standards, not only for the state and national organizations that participate in the process. DESCA has developed a line of works which is specific to the impact of carbon credits to the rights of the indigenous peoples and local communities in each of the activities related to the climate change agenda. And LESCA, the rapporteurship and LESCA should report on the impact of the so-called green financing initiatives such as projects and programs that will generate credits for voluntary carbon markets on indigenous peoples, and to incorporate the issues stated in this request in the monitoring of the situation of human rights in Chapter 4A of its annual report and in annual reports of the Special Rapporteurship for the Freedom of Expression and DESCA. Finally, we ask the Commission to urge the countries of the region to adopt regulatory frameworks that are effective for certification, registration, and marketing of carbon credits, taking into account the potential effect on the recognized rights of indigenous peoples and local communities, to establish a roadmap to guarantee the right to free determination and prior and free and informed consent to indigenous peoples in the carbon credit markets, especially because this could lead to intra-ethnic and intercultural conflicts that could result from the process. We thank the commissioners for their attention, and this is the end of our presentation.
Señores comisionados.
Commissioners, in the minute we still have, we would like to thank you for this opportunity, and we'd like to tell you that we have turned in a written report with more details on things that are affecting indigenous communities and local traditional communities of Peru, Brazil, Colombia, and Guyana, so that you can better understand what is occurring in their context and in their communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Commission for its questions, comments. We have some time. I think we have 20, 25 minutes on our side. And I would like to start with Commissioner Alon.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Estuardo Ralón, Commissioner and Rapporteur. I would like to thank you for the information you have provided us. I think everyone who have participated in this hearing. Within the framework of this 109th session, the purpose of having this hearing is precisely for the Commission to be able to be provided with updated information on the impact on human rights of the expansion of the carbon market in Latin America. While today we have focused on the information you have provided us with presentations from Brazil, Colombia, Guyana, and Peru, the perspective of the Commission should be regional, and I believe the information that was provided to us, not only verbally, but also the information you might send us in writing, will be an important input for us to be able, whether through special rapporteurships or the Commission itself, to be able to take action and urge for these situations and human rights violations can be properly addressed regarding conventional obligations. I would like to ask a question, though. We would like to hear more information about the lack of regulations that we have heard about, that there is a claim regarding the actions that you bring to us. What is the type, what internal claims have you placed? What is the reaction of communities, in other words, when you realize that you're being affected? So do you use a constitutional mechanism or precautionary measures? What are the pathways used internally to present your claims? That is my question. I am very thankful in advance of the information you might provide. Thank you.
I turn over to you, Commissioner Demise.
Thank you very much. I also thank the delegations present. Pegging on the comments made by Commissioner Alon, I would like to find out with respect to what is existing in participatory mechanisms with the state, whether this issue is addressed or how it is addressed or if it is addressed in any, on the one hand, and then with respect to grievance mechanisms, those that exist, what should be improved. Also with respect to the mechanisms, the participatory mechanisms, what are the actions or measures that need to be taken in order for the communities to have a proper input in this discussion and in the actions? Thank you.
Thank you. Special Rapporteur, Vaca.
Muchas gracias, Presidenta. Les habla Pedro Vaca, a cargo de las...
Relator Vaca, in charge of the Freedom of Expression Rapporteurship. We thank all the organizations who requested this regional hearing. I would like to begin by giving you a reflection, and that is that when the strategic plan of the Commission was presented, the cross-cutting strategic lines were presented to the Commission on the basis of conversations that we knew we would be receiving. And this is an acknowledgement not only of the valuable information you have provided, but also the identification of common elements throughout the region. We have taken note of the main concerns that have been presented to our office. In this regard, I would like to go more deeply into three issues. In some cases, there have been requests for access to information to some state agencies. Would you be able to tell us, whether now or in writing, later, specifically what your requests have been, and in particular, what the response has been, if there was a response, and if you received a negative response, would you be able to tell the rapporteurship if there was some kind of argument as to why not? And this is of public interest because this would be probably in specific damage if the information was not provided or if the information was not available even, due to technical deficiencies that would allow our office to monitor this situation even better. And secondly, in response to the petition request, which is corresponding to the rapporteur for the freedom of expression, and to ask you whether the communities and the organizations that are with you could have any sort of input to provide clarity of what would be an index as to what would be an active transparency index. And La Roya and in other cases, we heard about active transparency indices. Therefore, it's not just a duty of the state to provide information publicly or public information when it is requested, and that would be passive transparency. But rather, this is an issue which is more important, to have periodic and proactive provision of updated information. We would like to see if this is feasible with the okay of the Commission. and to respond to this request. So I'd like to ask, there is a minimum index of active transparency that you think would be key so we can have a horizontal public debate on an issue that affects not only the countries mentioned, but also because of the places where they are located, it affects the whole of humanity. And also, if the countries think there are potential mandatory subjects, because if we talk about mandatory subjects, those would be people who are under the obligation of requesting, or rather responding to a request for information, or if they do so proactively. And I do have a question. This has led to a very expected public debate. So I'd like to ask that on the basis of your experience, have you identified a public debate in that regard, especially with the participation of local and national media, if academia has analyzed the issue and so on? And even if there is media in the territories, whether these are community media, and the question is, how is the information flowing from the centers to the territories? From the capitals to the territories, because as we have seen at the OAS, the best is to have a proper debate among all the stakeholders so that there is more transparency. And thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me the floor.
Thank you very much, Special Rapporteur Vaca, and I turn over to Special Rapporteur on Economic, Social, and Cultural and Environmental Rights. Special Rapporteur Palumo.
Muchas gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to the organizations that requested this hearing for the opportunity to address this issue within the framework of this session. This is such an important topic, and a topic which, in my opinion, is extremely relevant in terms of several issues. First, in terms of reforestation and forest conservation projects, which have really good press, and they have a very good face, especially in terms of practices in territorial and ancestral lands protected by indigenous peoples. And that is why this is extremely relevant to your presentation, and we could go more into detail in them. And the fact that there's no recognition of traditional and ancestral knowledge through such as previous free and informed consent, access to information, and so on. These are relevant issues, and it would be important to bring them to the fore in this regard. One of the things that I'm most interested in also is that which relates to the distribution of benefits, because these benefits could be very useful to communities. If we identify historical structural discrimination that could be focused on guaranteeing social, economic, cultural, and environmental rights, including health and under the rubric of environmental justice. As a result of your presentation, we see that there's serious questions as to whether these rights are being protected. And these benefits are not really benefiting any of the communities or the environment. That's a particular question of mine. I'd like to say, within the framework of the working plan that was presented for consultation with civil society organizations, which is being consulted at the OAS with the states, which has led to countless civil society bilateral organizations with activists, and who have also presented their general statements to the Commission, and then briefly or momentarily I will be providing a document to be considered by the Commission. One of the priority areas is the specific issue related to the climate emergency and the protection of the environment. And it has several subtitles, and there are many connective points in these negotiations, as it's sometimes called. We will also talk about companies and human rights, which is closely linked to this, and fiscal and economic policies. And these are the 4 pillars of this working plan that is based on 4 pillars. The specific topics of a fair transition, green transition, and nature-based solutions, which is the way they are sometimes called, is not only under this agenda, but under other solutions, such as technologies with the purpose of protecting the climate, such as carbon capture technologies, solar energy management, and so on. These are strategies which have a common core as to not questioning the model of what is actually leading to the situation that is occurring. These are solutions that actually feed back to the machinery of international carbon markets, or through huge carbon capture infrastructure construction and large projects for solar management, which are initiatives which could lead to cheating yourself, like cheating yourself at solitaire, which would allow for the continuation of this model, which is actually the one causing climate change and is actually the culprit in its fast decline. So I am not able to ensure that I will be able to provide you with the deliverables you have requested. Yes, the inclusion in the monitoring framework, obviously, but we will do everything possible to include it in our working plan that has many relevant outcomes. This is very relevant, certainty, and is closely linked to more than one of the pillars that we are proposing to the Inter-American Commission, such as the working plan for the next 3 years for the special rapporteurship. Thank you very much, and we will certainly be working on this issue, and perhaps not a report that just as the one you're setting forth, because this would require some resources, which we will actually try to do, but we are certainly going to generate some actions in this regard. Thank you.
To you, Deputy Executive Secretary Período.
Gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I'd like to say that this hearing is an example as to why civil society organizations are the engine behind the Inter-American human rights system, with innovative topics and things that affect, in this case, indigenous peoples in 4 countries of the region. This is a common subject in the whole region. And as you can see throughout this table, there's the focus on access to information, the issue of resource distribution, and also the issue of the rapporteurship for indigenous peoples, and that is why these hearings in the past few years is something that the rapporteurship has used to build its strategy. We heard about companies and human rights, but we also heard about rights to property or property rights, indigenous peoples, developed jurisprudence and standards for free, prior, and informed consent, and rights for the Amazon. And I recently issued a report on free self-determination. From that perspective specifically, I would like to ask how it is that you have held a vision of what should be the contribution for the rapporteurship for indigenous peoples, and perhaps go more into depth on the issue of prior, free, and informed consent for these types of projects. We gave the example of Peru, we gave the example of Colombia. The Commission would be able, perhaps through its mechanisms, not to just issue a thematic report, but to address specific issues. This is a very pragmatic question. Commissioner, Madam Chair.
I want to join my fellow Commission members in thanking you for your presentation. And I have to say, it is an area which can seem quite esoteric to those of us who have not thought really deeply about it. But now that you've brought it to our attention, I understand the issue is, part of the issue is that the land that has been historically occupied by indigenous peoples has been monetized, and in that monetization, designated protected areas, and therefore the user, your use of the lands that you have historically occupied has been restricted. I think this is what I'm getting from what you've said. And your use has been restricted, and that restriction has come without, yes, free, prior, informed consent. There may have been some consultation, there may have been some sharing of information, but what you're saying is that's not the same as consent, because you may not have had the opportunity to fully engage with the issue or to understand the implications for your community. So I get that. What I want to ask is now, what do you think, what have been the actual impacts of this carbon credit scheme on the communities? And also, what do you see to be the future projected impacts of this scheme on the use of the land and also the livelihoods and the culture of indigenous peoples in those lands which are affected by this sale of carbon credits? I also want to find out, do the indigenous communities have any interaction with the entities that have bought these carbon credits? Is there any exchange? And then finally, the contracts that are framing this restriction of user, do indigenous communities have access to the contracts? Is there a public platform where you can go and have a look at what has been agreed in relation to lands that indigenous communities occupy? So you have quite a lot of questions to answer, and you have, I think it's 30 minutes?
Yes.
30 minutes to do that, so you have some time.
Gracias. Thank you, Commissioner Estuardo. Regarding legal actions that have been carried out internally in Peru by indigenous communities, we must say that the particular case that we presented was the case of Quichua people, the Amazonian region, which is a key case in San Martin where they said that they are not being recognized as owners of the lands, or their presence is not recognized, and the state is assigning a protected area that is developing carbon projects. So in this regard, one of the first demands of the indigenous peoples in this sector is for first to establish a condition to carry out any carbon project to have the recognition of ownership of land ownership by indigenous peoples. Otherwise, it's null and void. And also in the San Martin region, there is a case in the courts for the recognition of the territories that the Puerto Franco community of the Quichua people in San Martin should be recognized, and we are asking for recognition of land ownership and the distribution of benefits that come from these carbon projects that are being given to the park. And what I believe is very serious is that we need to the community is being affected by the cost of the years they have to wait to receive the benefits of these processes.
Responding to the questions about how grievance mechanisms should be improved. Non-state-based grievance mechanisms should adhere to the UNGP's criteria, and international human rights bodies like the IACHR should clarify that the UNGPs do apply to bodies like ART. We can only cite to ART. We could only cite to the ART grievance mechanisms as a specific example. The UNGP, this is the United Nations Guiding Principles for Business and Human Rights. Criteria are legitimacy, accessibility, predictability, equitability, transparency, and rights compatibility, and being a source of continuous learning. We know that ART grievance mechanisms updated complaints guidance lists those UNGP's criteria as principles to follow. We do not believe the actual design of the grievance mechanism follow those criteria. For example, the grievance mechanism is not designed to be independent. It is the ART Secretariat that recommends an issuance of credits and ART Board that decides to issue credits. A grievance mechanism is supposed to be independent of the operational arm of the body. The ART Secretariat made the decisions to dismiss both the complaint and the appeal of the APA. It is impossible for a grievance mechanism with such a lack of independence to be legitimate. ART never reviewed the substantive concerns raised in the complaint. A grievance mechanism should allow for review of complaints of rights violations, but in ART's case, the complaint only looked at whether the verification process was followed. They did not involve any experts on Indigenous people's rights to help understand whether our complaint about violations of Indigenous rights were valid. And then our appeal was dismissed without ever being considered. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Me quiero referir brevemente.
Thank you. I want to make reference to the question by the Executive Secretary, María Claudia Pulido. We believe that the Inter-American system of human rights in general, and in particular the Commission, has a fundamental role to play to ensure that its rapporteurships in the next few decades address the issue of relationships between climate change and human rights as one of the core issues in the system. We believe that consultative opinions regarding climate change is an opportunity for creating an ideal platform to make headway in that regard and to speak to other issues in particular, such as the case of carbon bonds. And secondly, we believe that Indigenous peoples have been hugely generous with the human rights system, and they have taken the standards into account. They've come to the Commission. They participate in the UN system. And we think that we need to see more generosity from civil society and the Inter-American system to take into account and take seriously the jurisdiction and rights of Indigenous peoples, and to take into account a flowing and permanent process of discussion. And while we should recognize that climate change is man-made, not all communities have the equal responsibility for its creation. That is why farmers, peasants, and indigenous peoples participate the least in this process of climate change, but are affected the most. This is something where the Commission can support us and make progress. Thank you.
Commissioners, this is the Foundation for Due Process. And in view of the difficulties Flavia Santos has had to make her presentation online, she sent a video and has asked us to refer to some of the questions you have asked. But first, I would like to begin by the question asked by the Executive Secretary. I think it's key in the hearing that we have representatives from different rapporteurships, including the two special rapporteurships, because it's a question that, like others in the climate change agenda, is cross-cutting throughout the mandate of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. There's a convergence, a difficult convergence here, difficult to find the right balance between state commitments on climate change and human rights commitments, particularly the rights of indigenous people. And I'm going to give a few concrete examples from Brazil of the way in which often these matters are often relegated to private law, and the state washes its hands due to the lack of regulation and basically leaves it in the hands of private companies, private certifiers, often with headquarters abroad, not even the countries where the operations are taking place, try to overcome controversy directly with the indigenous people and all the asymmetry of power and access to conflict resolution and undue solutions. As to the question of Commissioner Estuardo, in Brazil there's a technical note published by the public ministries of the Federal Union and the state of Pará as a result of a complaint presented by the Quilombola movement. And Flavia Santos represents one of these movements, in fact, basically complaining about violation of their rights. And as a result of these, both public ministries, Brazil is a federal state, have basically investigated possible crimes against persons participating in the certification as well as the contracts on indigenous territories that have been registered for agrarian reform. In other words, an express legal prohibition of contracts without prior approval by the state authorities. This public note has been added to the final report, which we gave the Inter-American Commission. There have been other judicial or legal actions canceling the contracts between private parties precisely because they have not followed the laws applicable to those private acts. To date, the judicial power has not even managed to eliminate any of these contracts, despite the fact that those actions were presented last year. And part of the difficulties have been that some of the countries have no headquarters. In Brazil, they have headquarters in England, so it's difficult to obtain this and all the repercussions of access to justice. As for access to the information, Pedro, we have tried to obtain the minutes of the contract between private entities, but we have not even been able to obtain it even through the legal ways. The company that is unfortunately contracting doesn't give us the contracts free of, and the minutes between the public ministry of the state of Pará and the federal public ministry and the authorities signing, the private entities who also signed that agreed to create the appropriate mechanism to deliver the contracts, but that has not even happened even through the legal pathways. So in view of the complexities, I conclude and come back to the initial proposal that the Inter-American Commission be aware of the fact that each one of their rapporteurships should find ways to cover all the aspects related to climate change and the carbon credit agendas in these indigenous territories. There was a question also of shared benefits. As you know, in Article 21.2 of the Convention on the Rights of Property has been interpreted in such a way that indigenous people have a right to share reasonable benefits in any economic activity of their territory. That's been said by the Inter-American Court and Convention in many thematic reports and sentences. And this is a right guaranteed in Article 15.2 of the ILO. And yet, the Declaration of the Indigenous People of the United Nations also considers a similar obligation. So these are rights that are expressly found in many articles that have been disregarded when managing, certifying, or hiring contracts. So I'll conclude by saying that part of the delegation presented a report to the Commission, and we're convinced that as a result of that, this ICHIR will be able to complete these studies. I'm going to refer to 4 issues which include part of the questions asked by you. And thank you for asking them. And again, thank you for listening to us. Part of the answers for the case of Colombia could be presented by a document we presented called Guyana, where we go into details of the model and develop details showing that the rules and the laws are insufficient and have had an impact on particular cases. The first thing that has to do with the question asked by Mr. Estuardo Alon is regarding the model and how it was considered between private parties, which implies that it's done through contracts that do not necessarily go to the constitutional jurisdiction. So it's not that easy for a community or indigenous people to allege this or argue this. Presumably, in states like Colombia, they have a public registry where the projects are recorded and the state follows up on them. But in the case of Colombia, the registry is suspended, which is the RENARIA. And in the absence of the administrative channels, the only possible scenario has been the constitutional one. But as we see, the carbon credits take years in Colombia. And we're only now arriving at the first constitutional sentence. And the second one has to do with what Rapporteur Palomo said. How can we define benefits? And there's something that's even more important, and I invite the table to consider this. Let's not imagine that let's not even imagine what a benefit is, because if we think that the model is external and it's only for business, then the benefit, of course, we're going to presume is for business. So why don't we take a few steps back and see what is seen as a benefit from the point of view of the territory? We heard that the benefit is not necessarily economic. And if it's going to be economic, as my colleague here said, and if there's going to be a distribution of benefits, then it should be implemented according to the priorities of the territory and not the benefits of an outside territory, which has happened in the years of colonialism. We say from outside, what's the benefit and how is it going to be followed? And if it's not followed, well then, if you're a bad indigenous, then you just don't know how to use the money. And that's how it works, unfortunately. I apologize for saying it, but there is some kind of link, I think, which we have to consider. And the rapporteur, Ledesca, has as a priority, which is the fiscal issue. Carbon credits, at least in the private market, are used to avoid taxes. In that case, like the carbon tax. But what happens if we realize, as we are realizing, that the states are not receiving taxes to guarantee social rights through mechanisms violating the human rights? So what's the responsibility of those states, fiscally speaking? And lastly, based on what they asked about prior consent, I want to call on the inter-American system, and I believe that there's interest, and there's an interest movement on prior consultation, but let's understand that we must avoid the problems of this prior consultation for the extractive model. What happens in so many territories? The prior consultation is not done. The communities present an action, and the judicial authorities suspend the project until the consultation is done. What happens is that it remains, the project is done outside the territory. And the consultation could become a mechanism which would violate other rights, like free determination. So maybe our suggestion would be that we not impose that prior consultation consultation as a solution, but that we go to the core of the problem and realize, and I'll close with that whoever formulates the projects, who are the protagonists of these projects, how are they formulated, how are they certified? Let's see how they implement the benefits. Thank you again for your attention. Again, in answer to the question of Rapporteur Pedro Barca as to access to information, I think that in the case of Peru, that's the worst of the whole thing, as Lideresa Marisol said, because as for the National Park Cordillera Azul, Blue Mountain Range, the leaders since 2019 have been trying to find the information about the carbon bonds, which were announced in England internationally, talking about the park, and in other countries, and they knew nothing about it. So the answers to the environmental ministry, which in Peru would be the one that leads the whole policy regarding this, was always negative, that they had no information, that they didn't know how much it was. And it was such a scandal that it was only in 2021 that we saw a publication from the Minister of the Environment at the time, Mr. Gabriela Quijandría, who expressly said that they had the greatest sale of carbon in the National Park Cordillera Azul. And we again asked for information at the time from the ministry, from the National Natural Protected Areas Service. And in that respect, the requests presented by the organizations who are here was also a denial. The state, the Ministry of Environment, said that what the minister was saying was that they had had a contract with Total Energies for the National Park Cordillera Azul and had sold about 30 million carbon credits. We asked them for the contract. We asked for other companies that had bought, and they said no, that they didn't have the information. So there is a plan there where we have a natural protected area managed by a third party, an NGO, CIMA, and as executor of the contract, they're the ones who manage the information. So when the state refuses to give us the information, we go to CIMA, and CIMA also tells us that they don't have the information, that that was private information, that it was not public, and they were not obliged to give the information. That's why we resorted to the Transparency Court in Peru, which is part of the Ministry of Justice. And in that sphere, the company, CIMA, the third party, not even the state, was ordered to give us the contract and all the information regarding the carbon purchasers and the figures of how many credits had been sold and what amounts. That's how serious this access to information is. And this takes place in a situation where the Peruvian state, who might have a law that complies with the climate change commitments, it has not actually developed the rules necessary to regulate and expressly develop all the content and commitments of the Varsovia framework and the Cancun safeguards regarding things such as a national registry of mitigation measures, which has not been approved since 2019. An internal mechanism of dispute solutions where we can ask the companies to report to the indigenous people or interested parties. That doesn't exist either. So we are in a situation where there are no rules necessary. And in our case, we have that situation, but there are worse cases elsewhere where there are projects that companies that develop projects are coming to the indigenous territory, are negotiating with the indigenous people in conditions which we know are not considering the intercultural or differentiated approach, and they don't want to share the contract that they've signed specifically with some of the communities, especially in the Ucayali area. So who's in charge of giving us the information? Who has the obligation to give us the information? In our case, we don't know. We've had to resort to the companies themselves or the NGOs or the third parties, and they have no control, and the violations can be infinite. That's what we have to consider. As to the question asked by the President, Roberta Clark, as to the impact on the indigenous people, I believe that in the case of Peru, the impact is such that in the Quechua case, the state refused to recognize their existence and their territory.
To the question about benefit sharing. Indigenous people should be the ones to tell the government what we consider the appropriate compensation and benefits from having all of our forests included in the National Carbon Program, not the other way around. This is a part of our right to self-determination. In Guyana's case, our villages were put in a position where our only options were to take the government's benefit sharing plan or get nothing at all for the carbon from our lands. Our acceptance of those limited benefits is now being used by the government to say we gave our free, prior, and informed consent to be part of the program from the outset. The ideal way for us to access finance from a carbon market is, if we choose to do so, would have been from our own villages to have time through internal processes to discuss our own plans and visions for life in and protection of our territories, and from there present this plan to the world as a grounded solution to climate change. This did not happen in Guyana, where the so-called solution was designed by the government, and to date, we have not even been presented sufficient information about what it really entails.
Muchas gracias nuevamente.
Again, thank you very much, Marisol Garcia from the Quichua people. And I want to refer to the participation of my colleague of what it means to have benefits for my people. For us, the recovery of our territory is the most valuable, a territory which we are being denied. Our ancestral practices are being denied to the extent that the protectors of the parks are burning the meat, not even selling it. They burn it, and we do that to maintain our families, and we can't go out fishing. We can no longer go out to find the medicinal plants or the fruits or the seeds that we use for jewelry to use to keep our families. And they think that the benefits for the indigenous people is to put out a sign outside the community or to give us some flour. And that's insulting for us, because it's not since 2019 that our rights have been violated. It's more than 20 years that our rights have been violated. We've been knocking on doors for over 20 years to be heard, because it's not fair that we work, and it's thanks to that that there are still forests in the Amazon in Peru. It's not the environmentalists. It's not the NGOs. It's not the natural protected areas that have protected that. They have that mistaken idea that the natural protected areas must be without the human presence. Then who are you protecting? What do they say? That the laws of the natural protected areas cannot be broken. And the question we ask ourselves then as the Quichua people, so where are the human rights of the indigenous people then? Because without a territory, they're pushing us to extinction. And unfortunately, we were the ones who sought for the space of dialogue and have signed agreements at technical tables that were never fulfilled. And that's another insult for my people, who've been humiliated and violated by the Ministry of the Environment, Serran and CIMA, of the Peruvian state, that simply believes that we are their neighbors, and they've left us, according to them, with an area that we get like maybe 100 or 200 hectares, which is insufficient for us to keep our people of 70, 80, or 100 families. We are being denied that right to the deeds of our land. We just want them to return what they stole from us, our ancestral territory. Thank you very much. If I may, Chair, I'd like to come back to Pedro Vaca's question and share one thing more in Brazil that doesn't have that much to do with the non-delivery of the information, which should be public, but more of a manipulation of the public opinion to generate some type of reputational profit for the companies. The companies that have signed carbon credit contracts in the state of Pará have had videos saying that they benefited the communities, the Carambora, who participated in the negotiations. But that's false. It's clearly documented. And as a result of the complaints presented by the Culambola groups, these videos have been removed from the web pages, which bring me to another thing, which is part of the mandate of the Commission, which is the Redesca that's led all this in its report on the companies and human rights. As you see, there are many components here where the main actor, or even the the victim with a mandate of not being able to attribute direct responsibility to the company, and yet they are an important part of the problem. And there's a whole range of self-regulation here, so there's no real way to know exactly what these companies should be doing to act with transparency and provide the appropriate information. I'm talking, for example, of areas that are dedicated to the environmental conservation and carbon credit aspects. The best-known certifier is 5 blocks away from here, called Verra, and has made certifications in the state of Pará as well as in Peru. And I hope they come to this and realize that there are a series of obligations, and they're forced to supervise and regulate the activities of these certifiers.
About whether indigenous communities have been in communication with the buyers of carbon credits. In Guyana, indigenous peoples were not afforded an opportunity to participate in the decision to sell carbon credits that were certified by ART. The deal with Hess was announced the day after carbon credits were certified. We had no prior knowledge of this deal and no exchange with Hess. We have heard that many communities, when they heard of this, were unhappy that the credits generated from their forests were sold to an oil company, which means that the carbon that is stored in indigenous forests is being used to excuse the further emissions by this oil company. Thank you.
I think we are at the... Yes, thank you very much, representatives of the civil society from Colombia, Peru, and Guyana, for bringing this issue to our attention. I think it was Maria Claudia Pulido that said this is the value of civil society, taking us to thinking about things that we may not have thought about in the same way, because, of course, you're connected to your communities in your own way. A lot of things to think about through the prism of the rights of indigenous people, but also through the prism of the rights to a clean and healthy environment, and also the interdependence of the world in addressing this climate crisis. How do we address the climate crisis in a way that is equitable, that those who are not producing the problem don't disproportionately carry the burden of solving it? I think this is part of the issue here. I want to thank everyone for your contributions, and also to let you know that we are alert to receiving any information that you want to send to us. We have reports. We would like to know more and read more. And I'm sure, Special Rapporteur Paluma, this might be an area that you may want to factor into your very heavy work program so that we can follow up on it some more as well. With that, I want to thank everyone in the audience who have stayed with us for this afternoon. All the very best. The hearing has come to an end.